if I give you the blind resume of your bell cow loses and can't even muster an offensive touchdown in a highly hyped game on national TV. Your second best team got upset by a 500 program over the last 5 years, also on national TV. Your third best team was trailing 41-3 in their season opening game on national TV. You had a team lose at home to NIU. You had a team become the first Power 5 team to lose to Charlotte. There's resume number one. Resume number two. One team gets absolutely smoked in a neutral site game in which only 2,000 people showed up for. One team becomes only the fifth ever ranked team to lose at home to an FCS opponent. Another team lost to Nevada. Another team lost to Utah State. And again, one of your bell cows is losing in the fourth quarter to Fresno State. There's resume number two. And how about resume number three? You demolish a fellow Power 5 team at a major stadium in a big spot, AT&T Stadium in Dallas, and you only have one loss. That'd be the Big 12, right? And if we want to include Texas in this, I'm even just going the 7-1 for the irate 8, whatever you want to call them. If you want to include Texas, that was a mighty impressive win by the Texas Longhorns as well. You guys understand the point here and what I'm doing. It is and has always been ridiculous to consider a new-look Big 12 with Houston, BYU, UCF, and Cincinnati as a league that cannot compete with the Pac-12 or even the ACC. Okay? That has always been a ridiculous notion. And I realize it's just 1 week of the season. That's not going to tell the story of an entire season. I'll wait and see how this all plays out. But right now, with the data that we have, it's a nice little snapshot and a reminder in the micro of how ridiculous that statement is. If you want to go more to the macro, we can start pulling out the data that we do have, which is, for instance, over the last 3 years, the Big 12 in the S&P Plus rankings, and I mean the new Big 12, has fared better in terms of average rank of the teams than the ACC and the Pac-12, and by a fairly substantial margin, especially over the ACC. There is so much dragging down the ACC that is just garbage. There is so much hot garbage football that is played in the ACC. And same with the Pac-12. Man, it is so brutal. We hear all offseason about North Carolina and Mac Brown. They won the offseason. They lost 17-10 to Justin Fuente, who almost got fired last year from Virginia Tech. Miami's down 41-3 to Alabama. Clemson scored 3 points against Georgia. Georgia Tech lost at home to Northern Illinois. Duke, first P5 team to ever lose to Charlotte. Montana beats Washington. Oregon State lost to Purdue. Cal loses to Nevada. Arizona loses to BYU. Wazoo loses to Utah State. Terrible. And by the way, the Pac-12 still, even their marquee, UCLA gets the marquee win over LSU with their stadium 75% full of drunk LSU fans. That's after they put about 2,000 people in the Rose Bowl for their Week 0 game. There are problems in other leagues. And the point here has never been to tell you that the Big 12 would be definitively like the third best Power 5 conference out there without Texas and Oklahoma. No, I'm not saying that. But to suggest that it would be very far behind and like distinctly behind, I am fully bought in on that being a falsehood. That's a fallacy. And that is too many people being stuck in like the way that it's always been. And I think national media just being generally more friendly to the coasts, right? Being more friendly to the Pac-12 because of that. LA looked good. The rest of the Pac-12 looked awful. USC and UCLA looked really good on Saturday. The rest of the Pac-12 looked awful. They clearly have attendance problems. They're already behind right now every league with their payouts per team. The Pac-12 network has been a disaster. Nobody wants to watch it. They can't get it distributed, and now they have a new TV contract coming up in the next 18 months, and they've decided they want to stand pat with what they have. All right, fine. Do that. And the Big 12 will take a national brand in BYU. They'll take a real up-and-comer in UCF. They'll take the 2017 national champions in UCF. They'll take a top 10 team right now in Cincinnati, and they'll take a top 5 media market and recruiting market in Houston. And let's go to war, boys. I'm that this is not even me just posturing right now. I truly believe that can be a league that's competitive with the other two there. And the other piece of this is we're now seeing, I've heard it from a couple of people after Dennis Dodd first put it out there from CBS Sports, that there is a belief that it's possible they could get 20 to 25 mil per school for the TV contract with those 4 teams added. Even if that's too high and it's somewhere close to that, that is so much better than what we thought it was going to be at first. So count me in on week 1 being another little feather in the cap for the remaining 8 here, banding together and adding these 4 teams.
Well, and a big difference between the Big 12 and what you mentioned, the Pac-12 and the ACC, was wins and losses. Because it's not like, the Big 12 had 9-1. Yeah, that's great, but there were a few possessions away from it being a little bit more of a disaster, especially when it comes to the top of the pecking order in the Big 12. Oklahoma is a half yard away from Tulane continuing potentially a game-winning drive in Norman. Iowa State beats Northern Iowa by 6 points in a defensive battle, I guess is what you could say. They're both duds in the second half. But Baylor barely wins at Texas State. They win by 9 points. That's not very convincing to me. Oklahoma State wins by 7 points against Missouri State at home. There were still plenty of ugly in the Big 12. I would argue that K-State had one of the more better showings than anybody else in the Big 12 in the opening weekend. You would probably argue Texas was better looking than K-State in week 1, but the Cats definitely had a big smile on their face compared to the rest of the Big 12.
Well, I think it's Texas 1, I think it's K-State 2, and I think it's Texas Tech a not-so-distant 3rd. Yes, in terms of impressive performances. You make a valid point on some of the ugly that was out there. What Oklahoma State is doing, and I watched a cut-up of the replay of that game. It's like, they were up 20-3. They were really messing around there, and they didn't have Spencer Sanders. But I'm not going to sit here and make excuses for it. That was pretty bad for them to get to the point where they're having to defend their own goal line at the end of the game. The point is, again, not that the Big 12 made some definitive statement in week 1 that they are emphatically better than all these other conferences. It's that, hey, they are at worst very similar to what's going on in these leagues, especially when you consider UCF, Cincy, BYU, Houston, throwing that into the mix. Because you're right, Oklahoma State is going to have to be one of the real flag bearers of this new league. They fancy themselves the best brand that's left, and I think they're right that they're the best football brand that's left. You can't be messing around with Missouri State like that at home if you're going to be the best brand that's left. They need to pull themselves out of what's been kind of a mini slump with Gundy. Not a total slump, but not where they had been 5, 6, 7 years ago. They will have to get better. Baylor, I will give Baylor some benefit of the doubt there. Remember, that's a 2-win team from last year that just had its first full offseason, and they did go on the road. It's a weird spot to play that game on the road in San Marcos. And Iowa State, look, they just do it every year. I'm actually at the point where I'm not going to come in and hate on Iowa State. They do this every single year. There is always a slow start for the Cyclones. Whether it's Northern Iowa, whether it's Louisiana, whoever it is. And you know what? They didn't lose it this time. And that was with the Iowa game coming in, and now they have College Game Day and all the excitement. I cut them some slack on that. I think they will look much better against Iowa and kind of snap out of it like they always do. So, look, yes, I will be Big 12 excuse guy and make some excuses there, but at the same time acknowledge that, yes, it could have very easily, with a couple different results there, a couple plays go a different way. It looks very similar to what the ACC and the Pac-12 did, but then I'm reinforcing my own point because what did I just say? It looks very similar. It looks very similar. The overarching theme here is that in college football, there are not just 10 to 15 brands that move the needle, but there are like 5 to 10 schools competitively that really move the needle. And then everything else, there's going to be just a lot of fluctuation, and it's all very much the same. And we've gotten to the point now where a lot of that is concentrated in 2 leagues, in the Big Ten and the SEC. And then it's like everybody else. Clemson, notwithstanding. They are the one exception to that. That's the point that we're trying to make with the Big 12 here.